Good evening and welcome to the February 23rd work session. May we have roll call, please?
Yes. Cooney, Director Cooney is absent. DeBeat,
Here.
Dalby,
Present.
Kopp,
Present.
Phillips,
Present.
Schneider,
Present.
and Director Schur is absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Welcome to any visitors and media representatives, and we'll move right into the fiscal year 2027 budget. Tom Anderson. Right away.
Okay. So tonight we're going to talk about the budget for next year. And in front of you guys, I put this little two-sided chart. It's really a good chart to reference to throughout this presentation. And then you can, if you don't have one already, you can take it home with you and have it for future reference. So, okay. So we're going to talk about the certified budget, a document showing the taxes that we're going to levy for each fund and or program, and then, aggregate revenue and expenditures. So this report is going to be certified to the county auditor by April 30th. We're going to, for the upcoming fiscal year, we're going to have 2 public hearings. We got to have public hearing number 1, and we'll go through that. Public hearing number 2, and then approved by the board of directors on our April board meeting. So this is just kind of a timeline here. By March 5th, we have to submit our maximum property tax levy to the county auditor. So we'll go through that tonight. And then sometime between March 10th and 20th, we'll publish that proposed property tax hearing number 1, and then we'll have that. So then, I guess, March 15th is when the county auditor will send out the proposed property tax statements to residents. And then March 30th, the 4th Monday of the month, we're going to have that public hearing number 1. And that has to be at a separate meeting. There can't be any other agenda items on there. It's just strictly a public hearing on that proposed property tax notice. And then we'll publish again for public hearing number 2 in that time frame. And then on April 13th, which is our regular board meeting, that night we'll have the public hearing number 2 and then adopt the budget for next year, which obviously is ahead of the April 30th deadline. And then sometime in May or June, we'll get a preliminary tax rate release from the Department of Management, because there's always some final adjustments based on how the legislature ends. So obviously there's pending legislation out there. I know some things happened last week, and the House and the Senate agreed on some SSA, but it's, nothing's finalized yet. Those sections there, those are just kind of where those, whatever is determined, those get slotted into our aid and levy calculation on those lines. So there's also the district cost per pupil, transportation equity, property tax replacement, AEA funding, instructional support, state aid funding. And obviously there's a lot of property tax reform, I think unknown. I don't know if anything's been finalized on that, but there's still property tax reform out there, and then management levy limitations, which last I heard wouldn't take effect till the next fiscal year. So this is just a little history of what that SSA is, the state supplemental aid. You can, excuse me, you can see there in red, 2% is what's been proposed. But you can see kind of goes all over the board there, going back to FY 2008-9. So when we do our projections, like for next year, we have, right now we're doing our projections for next year with 0%, and then 28 through 31, we did use 2% in those projections. The general fund is the primary focus tonight, and projecting the tax rates, unspent authorized budget, state supplemental assistance. This chart obviously shows the history of SSA. Currently this year in FY26, that our state cost per pupil is $7,988 per pupil. This is just a chart here of K-12 budget enrollment versus enrollment served. The main difference, obviously, I think we're all aware of, it's net open enrollment out. That purple line is budget enrollment or certified enrollment, means the same thing. And then the enrollment served. So this last fall, our net open enrollment was minus 234. So, you know, leveling enrollment could be within the next 5 years. You know, our kindergarten sizes are around the 290. High school is still around the 330, 360. So going back to October of 2014, our certified enrollment was 5328. And our enrollment served, I'm sorry, and then in 2025, obviously it was 4245. So, you know, about a 19% decrease since then. So, so we're going to talk about our first financial indicator. Obviously, in the general fund, spending authority is what drives Iowa Public Schools. Unspent authorized budget, you hear that term. UAB is that legal spending authority that we have. The UAB is what we have left at the end of the fiscal year. So the calculation there is our maximum authorized budget minus total expenditures divided by that maximum authorized budget. You know, we've been, the next graph will show where we've been at, but I didn't get FY25 for some reason, I couldn't find it, but it's roughly the same. The average is 25.5% across the state of Iowa. It's good to be in that 5 to 15% range, or I'm sorry, it's recommended to be in that range. We don't want to ever be negative. So, and here is the graph then of where we sit. So state aid, so let's see. So some examples of, I think I've talked about this before, the concept of spending authority versus, you know, why not, how come it's not just like, not everybody pays property taxes. So that helps the concept of spending authority work, or we get state aid reductions every year for certain things, so cash is taken away from us. So, but we still have the spending authority to spend that allocation. So I've talked about, well, back in 2011, there was a state across the board cut because the state ran out of money and schools got cut 10% of their budget. So, you know, but we kept the spending authority, but we did not get the cash. So, and then I think I explained this before, where all public schools have to proportionately pay towards students that don't have resident districts that are in juvenile homes. And so for Muscatine, that was $98,413 this year of cash that was taken, but we still have the authority to spend that $98,000. And then obviously there's other things such as special education and ELL. We're required by law to support those two populations. If funding or authority doesn't match the spending, then we have a mechanism through cash reserve to get, get that spending, I guess. We have to use our cash reserve, so we have to replenish our cash reserves every year. Our second financial indicator is our solvency ratio, and that's just a snapshot, a point-in-time measure of revenue remaining, assuming our district would close its doors at the end of June 30th, after gathering all the year's revenues and paying the year's obligations. It's calculated, we take our unreserved and assigned fund balances divided by our general fund revenues. So again, the recommended range is to be in that 5 to 15%. The average is 20.1%. And if you look at the next slide, you can see that we were right at around 14.5% in FY25. And then we did project out based on those, enrollment projections, SSA projections, expenditure projections, and I'm comfortable with looking one, maybe 2 years out. When we 5 years is a lot of things can change in those 5 years. So, but we're at within that range still. So this is a chart of our property valuations in Muscatine School District. Property valuation is a key component impacting our tax rate. There is property valuation we calculate for the general fund, and then property valuation for PEPL and instructional support levy. And because that includes both regular and then TIF, there's TIF valuation, and that is excluded for the general fund rate, but it is included for those other. And then you can see there, property tax valuations for Muscatine did increase about 1.6%, or 24.8 million, while for doing our FY27 budget. And we did use an estimate of an increase of 2% every year, going out for future years. This is a comparison that I've shown before in the past. It breaks down each piece of our overall levy in the general fund and management fund and the physical plant and equipment levy. And remember, we don't have a debt service. We don't have general obligation debt. We have sales tax revenue debt that is paid from a different source. So we do not have a property tax for the debt service fund. So an SSA rate, and you see there on that second line, the budget guarantee. So that $956,635, that's 59 cents basically per $1,000 valuation for property tax. We'd have to have like a 3% SSA to be off of the budget guarantee. So, and there's another slide coming up here that I'll show you that kind of will walk through that calculation. And then we did look at cash reserve for next year, and we did increase it around $200,000, and then our management fund levy by another $250,000. So the practice in the management fund levy is to make sure that we can cash flow for our annual expenditures that we incur. I think I've explained that before, where a majority of our management fund expenditures have to be paid in July. And so we want to make sure we have the cash to be able to do that. So I kind of project out 2 years with the management fund levy. And then we just, at the end of, it's projected that we'll have just over 8 months worth of reserve at the end of FY26. So we won't have quite enough for those expenditures. So that's why we're proposing that increase to $2,750 or it could be even $3 million. So while our overall rate is increasing, the general fund is declining. And I have another slide here to show the history of our tax rate for Muscatine schools. So the management fund expenditures, it is a significant influence on our rate. So I know you've heard probably of this uniform and additional levy in our general fund. So every school district in Iowa is taxed at $540 per thousand, and then there's that additional levy. Factors impacting that are special ed, ELL, enrollment, our at-risk dropout prevention, and the budget guarantee, that's that additional levy there. So you can see there that that's been around it's kind of hard to read, isn't it? But right under the $9. So let me go back one slide. So 1051, it's 1065 this year. And it'll go down to it's projected to go down to 1051 next year for the general fund. So this is our cash reserve levy graph, and the cash reserve levy, obviously it's annual, it's all property tax. There is a limit to a cash reserve levy. Like we have every year that we look at our reserves, basically our fund balance, and then 20%. Once we reach that 20%, we can't do a cash reserve levy. So we haven't been in that situation in several years, but the cash reserve levy provides funds. Obviously every time I come forward with asking for additional spending authority for special education, overspending, or ELL, those are all financed with cash reserves, and then we need to make sure we replenish them every year. Just talk a little bit about that instructional support levy. The instructional support levy allows districts to raise spending authority and cash by board action for 5 years or voter action for 10 years. And, in our district, we can use our instructional support levy for any general fund purpose. And then we do utilize an income surtax to pay this instructional support levy, a 2% income surtax with property tax. And that is in the language, so we have to have at least 1% income surtax. And again, I'm going to just talk about, it's technically, the revenue program district cost is that budget enrollment times the district cost per pupil is regular program district cost, and then it's 10% of that number is our instructional support levy. Technically, it's not really 10% because way back when this was implemented, there was a state aid portion, and the state does not fund the state aid portion. nor are we allowed to cash reserve that or, generate that through property taxes, that state aid portion. So I will tell you that it's technically a 6.7% instructional support levy because the state shortfall is about $1.1 million, so. So management fund, I think I've talked about this before. Our early retirement incentive payments are paid out of management fund. Property casualty insurance, work comp insurance. Let's see here. Work comp insurance and our local government risk pool that we belong to comes out of there. Any unemployment that we have to pay comes out of the management fund. So, let me see, I had a management fund. Let me just bring this up here because I want to. So as I stated before, at the end of FY26, we'll have about 8 months worth of reserve to pay for FY27. And we're really trying to build that up to be 1.0 or above. So it is projected, we're getting in our renewals here in the next month or so for property casualty. We have a wind hail buy down, storm protection fund, and then, as I think I said, unemployment, workers' comp, the Iowa Local Government Risk Pool. And then we also can pay deductibles out of the management fund, so I do budget for that, $50,000 a year. So at the end of fiscal 27 then, based on the proposed management fund levy, would be at a 124. So but not, as I said earlier, there is some legislation out there that could restrict how much our management fund levy, how much we can have in reserve. So we'll see how that affects Muscatine schools here. So, all right. So the next slide is your physical plant and equipment levy. There's two pieces to that. There's the board approved 33 cent, and then there is the voter approved $1.34. And if you remember back on the presentation or the monthly report I put at the bottom of that calendar when these levies expire and when I'm gonna recommend that we proceed with renewing them. So we'll just wanna make sure we stay on top of that. And then you can see there how much, it's the rate is the same, obviously, 33 and then $1.34. So, okay. So here's a slide of our property tax history. And I could go back, while we strive to keep that rate stable, there are factors beyond your control. I was just going to go back again to FY14, we were at around $15.28, and we were above 15 through fiscal 17. And then, fiscal 18 and 19, we were at about $14.90, and then we kind of dipped down there in FY24 to $13.23. But obviously, this could change, probably will change before we're all done with our FY27 budget with the property tax reform. And I'll go back. Let me go back. Because I think if you remember in the legislation, there is a proposal for the state to pick up the budget guarantee of all districts in Iowa. So that would, how would that affect our property tax rate? Well, it would go down by the 59 cents, okay? So that's why, you know, we're dealing with what we know right now and not what the actual legislature has decided on. Okay. So here's that budget guarantee slide that I was talking about. You know, for FY26, 79.88 per student, and that was our budget enrollment, 43.15. And then you calculate that regular program district costs, and then you compare 101% of that to what you had the prior year. And so that's where that budget guarantee is just kind of a mechanism for districts like us with declining enrollment. And so it kind of gives you a 1-year grace period, you know, to utilize that authority, and then, you know, hopefully we're making decisions so that, you know, we're anticipating, I guess, reductions every year. So that's the budget guarantee, and that's the resolution that has to be approved by the board every year. And so I'll bring that forward on the next board meeting so that we can get that approved and put on file. But it's pretty simple resolution. So this next slide is just a summary. I know it's a lot of numbers there, but expenditures, actual expenditures of 25. I did a re-estimate of fiscal 26 and then a projection for FY27. I did it by fund, general, you know, activity, management, the save fund, which is sales tax revenue. You know, I just got done telling you we don't have a debt service levy, but we do have money in there, and that's money that we transfer from save to debt service to pay those revenue bonds. And then expenditures also in those functional categories. If you remember, you know, once we set our budgets here to the 89, I don't know why those two numbers don't match. I better go check that out. The total of 87.817 should match the total requirement. So I'll make sure that's fixed before we publish this. But, you know, we have to stay within those functional categories, and I monitor those through our line item budget every month, and then come May, we'll probably have a budget amendment, but that's what this document shows, I guess. All right, public hearing number 1. This is the taxpayer statement that we have to send to the county auditor. And the statement informs the taxpayers of the upcoming school public hearing where the proposed property taxation for next year will be presented. Remember, taxpayers get that combined notification of city, schools, city, and counties. So, and I think the school is going to be listed first. You know, we'll receive the oral written comments like we did last year, and that referenced effective tax rate that you see there, that would be, that's interesting because it's just, what it's doing is it's holding the current taxation constant while using next year's fiscal year's taxable values. Don't know what that means, but that's what is showing up on this document. So the final tax rates will change, obviously due to adopted amounts, legislative changes, other levy authority, and there are other levy authorities not included in that, such as like community colleges and EMS. There's, you know, lots of other things not included in that proposed notice that goes out. So it's very confusing to recipients, I think. So this next slide is just kind of an example of that. So the top part, what the comparison shows, they use $100,000 assessed value. They do a mandatory 10% increase in assessed value. You know, I think we're all familiar maybe with what rollback is. So that number changes year to year. And you can see that, you know, what a taxpayer would get would be their tax would go up $21. So the next part down is just kind of a realistic look. And I just took a property with those two assessed values on there for last year and for this coming year. And you can see, you know, the same tax rate of 13.9009, it's going to show, you know, taxes going down by $90. So, you know, because there's things in that top part that aren't, you know, homestead credit is not included in the top part that goes out to taxpayers. So you can kind of see why it would be confusing, that form, that document that goes out. But so, still talking about FY27, you know, we're trying to do anything we can between now and the end of this fiscal year to minimize expenditures. We're going to look at additional cost reductions through attrition. And still identify around 2 to 2.5 million in general fund expenditure reductions, at least if not all or partly for FY27. You know, and evaluate and look at new funding flexibility opportunities. So that is my budget presentation. I would entertain any questions if you have. I'll try to answer them if I can. Any concerns, any wonderments? March 30th, I said, is that public hearing number 1. So we'll go forward with getting, you know, I'm not sure how much is going to change between now and March 4th with, you know, if SSA ends up being 2% and that gets signed into law, do I make sure that I get that changed for what I send to the Department of the auditor? So there's a lot of things that could happen between now and March 4th. Otherwise, we'll just go with what, you know, we presented here tonight. And obviously, the tax rate can change based on what law happens. So.
Tom, I have a quick question
Okay.
here. If we go back to the statement, like the county auditor responsibility for the March 30th, 2026.
This one? This slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at the reason, the one that is highlighted in
Yeah,
yellow.
declining enrollment.
Yeah,
So we have to put in, if our total tax asking is going to increase, we have to put a reason
Yes.
why. And so, you know, obviously, budget guarantee, is more property tax, because that's all property tax, so that's what we're saying there with that statement. You know, our management fund levy I talked about, property casualty insurance, anticipated increases, that affects the management fund. You know, we're proposing an increase to the management fund levy. And then cash reserve, we're proposing an increase to the cash reserve levy for, you know, to cover our special education English language learner costs not funded by the state. So that's what that rationale would be that's highlighted that will
yeah,
publish.
and I looked at, can we add also the decrease in or lower SSA as a reason?
You can, yeah. I mean, yeah, I could just put,
Because this is part of it
yeah,
too.
yeah, right, right. Yep,
Yeah,
yep,
okay, thank you.
yep.
It does show that some things are out of our control.
Yeah,
I think that,
Yeah. Okay,
Thank you.
yeah, thank
but
you guys.
ultimately, our tax rate is not going up. It's just that
Right.
what we're taxing has
Right,
gone up,
right.
right? So I think that is good news.
Yeah, the tax rate is gonna stay the same roughly, and it's
I
probably gonna
wish
go
we didn't have
down.
to put anything, because
Right. And it's the total tax dollars that is going up with the, basically the same rate, but that's because of property valuations going up, so.
in the slide just before that on budgeted expenditures, what is, just remind me, what's the non-instructional programs that would have that highest?
Yeah, the non-instructional would be
increase
like food service, basically.
Okay,
That's considered
that makes sense.
non-instructional, and that's really the only thing that goes through there. You might get management, there are management fund expenditures that come through for work comp for food service workers, so yeah, it's basically for food service.
Okay. I don't think we need to explain why that's an increase. Right?
Okay.
That one's pretty,
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, guys. Appreciate your
Thank you.
time. That's all I got.
I believe the next portion of our agenda is a superintendent update.
Yeah, so, we put this purposely after the budget presentation. I want to thank Tom for all the work in putting certainly all of this together. It's a lot of information, but it's also, and I still go back to look at last year's presentation at times. There is a lot of really good information in there. So I just want to update on a few things. I'll start, we've already kind of talked a little bit about some of these pieces. The House and the Senate have agreed, at least initially, to a 2% increase in SSA. Waiting on that to be finalized and the governor to sign that. And so what else, talk a little bit about some of the other pieces in that. And obviously a portion of that is that property tax relief for the budget guarantee. So I think that's 42 million across the state. That's one-time funds, right? So that it'll decrease the amount of the levy, so property tax payers will be, see a benefit from that. It's not necessarily extra money for the district. Okay. So again, I think that's a good thing, but just keep in mind it's a one-time thing. So next year, I doubt we'll see that. And part of this is because then they're going to look at some property tax reform, and we don't know what that's going to look like yet. There is some additional 2% increase in transportation equity that really doesn't, we typically haven't been able to access those dollars. There's also $7 million to be used for hourly staff. If you recall, it had been 14. And so the comments are they're gonna dedicate $7 million, and I think that the conversations have been they'll look at other funds to cover the other 7. So whether that will actually happen or not, we don't know. But we know there'll at least be the 7. For our staff here over the last couple of years, that's been about $125, Tom, for the hourly staff each year. It's been like $125 in like first part of, per semester. So about $250 total. So if it ended up at $7 million, obviously it would be half of that. Again, we'll kind of see how that plays out. There's also discussing changes to, instead of making the state making monthly payments on that, that it would be a quarterly. Talking with Tom, he doesn't think that would impact us negatively. It also proposes a second count day. So currently October 1st is our count day. And this initial proposal would have that in January, and then they would average. Initially, when this was proposed, they were going to take the higher of the two numbers, so nobody would lose. Now it's average. So, again, how that would play out for us year to year is probably hit and miss. And across the state, there'd be some winners and some losers on that. So again, we'll see how that plays out. If, with the 2% SSA, that budget guarantee, at 0%, as Tom showed you, that would be about 59 cents per thousand. That would drop at 2% to about 17 cents. So it is a pretty significant change from 0 to 2%. If they had gone, initially they talked about 2.25%, right? And then it was moved back to 2%. If they had gone with 2.25%, just right there, that would be about an additional $85,000 reduction in the budget guarantee. Right? And again, that's also property tax relief. But again, they've kind of coalesced around 2%. I don't anticipate I would expect the governor to approve that. She came out with 2%. So, but again, some of these interesting things will happen. So now we're, really for a long time we were told, hey, don't expect SSA for a long time because we're going to do the property tax relief first. And then all of a sudden it just shifted and they've not talked about property tax relief and focused solely on SSA. So they've gotten that done. They'll move into property tax reform. There are a lot of pieces here to see how this plays out. It could potentially impact us differently than it would like cities, counties, municipalities. Some of that they're talking about levy caps and different things, and that certainly would impact the city and the county differently from us. The other pieces we're kind of watching closely. There's been some conversation. The governor proposed kind of scooping some of those save dollars that we use for facilities up to, I think, 30%. If they did that, we would be on default on those bonds that we have, as well as a number of districts across the state, and a lot of them right here in our area. A number of districts would be in the same situation. And that's even considering we borrowed against those we structured those bonds really in a short-term borrowing standpoint. I think we only went out to 2030 because that's what we had the option for at that time. So even that short-term window of borrowing, we'd be upside down on that. So again, that would have to get paid somewhere. That means it would come out of the general fund and something else. And so those would be some tough conversations. So we'll keep a close eye on that. And again, we may see caps to the management fund. We may see other pieces. I think initially their conversation, Tom talked about we'd be at like 1.2. They've talked about 1.8, and I don't think we would get there. But again, it's hard to say. So we'll see how all those pieces fall out. So lots of stuff coming up, funnels, all those, there's lots of, there's bills that get sponsored that, people, they create a lot of buzz, but they don't always go anywhere, right? But we'll watch all of those closely and just continue to advocate. A number of those are typically unfunded. There's more responsibility on districts for compliance, for doing different pieces. Like again, when you think about doing additional count days, right? We have people here that are working on that, so they're going to spend additional time doing that. We're not getting any additional funds to do those things, right? So this is where it continues to kind of add up over time. So one of the things I wanted to share with you tonight, obviously we're going to continue to look at right-sizing, budget reductions. Last year we reduced about 1.7 million. I think it was 1.5 million the year before that. So we've been doing some significant reductions and right-sizing over these last many years. And this year we're talking about 2 to 2.5. That's even with a kind of a tighter, we had a little bit less enrollment decline than we've had in the past, and it's still that kind of large gap. So we're looking at everything, having conversations. I will say one of the pieces that I'm going to move forward with is looking at, from a district standpoint. I would tell you, and this conversation with principals right now, as well, is that any position that is open, we're going to have a conversation about whether we fill that position. That being said, the one I'm looking at not filling and looking at in a different way is our curriculum position here at the district. So as we have a retirement, looking at not replacing that. Now that means there's a lot of duties there that still have to happen, right? I know there's a lot of nervousness off to my right over here. So there are going to be pieces that we're going to have to, maybe look at adding some additional curriculum support in different ways that wouldn't be necessarily an administrative position. We'll also look at, we have AEA funds. We don't know what the long-term history of those are, but we can leverage those to hire some additional support from the AEA that can come in and help, support how we function there. It also means we may have principals picking up more duties. We may have other, there are going to be more things that I'm going to have to be responsible for. But I think given where we're at and what we're trying to accomplish, I don't know how we can get to our numbers without doing something more significant like that. I don't have all of the answers on what exactly that will look like yet, but we're working through that. And essentially, what are all the pieces, right, and all the responsibilities that have to get done? And again, that compliance piece continues to grow and grow and grow. And then we got to make sure we provide the support that make sure we don't drop any of those and move forward. So that doesn't change, obviously we have an open principal position with a retirement there. We have to have a building principal. We're going to be hiring that, right? But again, we're just going to have to look at it differently, get creative, and that means it is going to be a struggle at times, and then figuring out how all that's going to look. But I think it's important to start with that, and like I said, every position has to be evaluated as to where we're at. We've been doing a really good job when you think about, class sizes, like really trying to keep that tight. We have a formula for that. We may get some shifts there and get a few FTE out of that. We're looking at course requests and what we'll need for staffing. We know the junior high they've kind of already hit that low point, and probably going to bounce up a little bit, and then it's just going to bounce year to year. The high school is still declining a little bit too. So, but ultimately, when you've been doing this over year after year after year, you've done the easy things, right? So it's going to get harder. But I wanted to make sure I at least shared with you that we're having those conversations, and that's kind of how we're moving forward at this time. So with that, questions that I can answer for you.
Glenn, do we have any idea, I know it might be still early, but do we have any idea about how many teachers will be retiring around on average?
Not right now, no.
Not
I mean,
right
there are some
now.
that are eligible. How many will actually,
Yeah.
until they submit a letter,
Yeah.
we won't know. And some of that will become more clear. Right now we're in the process of negotiating. Once all those things get finalized, contracts go out, and then that's where typically people begin to sign the contract or don't sign the contract. So we will hear, well, I think this person might, or I think this person, but until they do, it's hard to say for sure. That being said, the other piece is just around negotiations. We know based on, state law, when we go to negotiate, we use CPI, which right now this month is 2.7, 2.8. Next month in March, it goes to 3.1. So we have to use that number or 3%, whichever is lower. So right now we're looking at 2.8 to 3%. That's what we know our salary increases are going to look like. And we're getting 2%, additional funds there. So I think that is the challenge when the laws you're required to follow, and then the additional support doesn't always meet those obligations that we're required to follow, which is a struggle. And again, when you're a declining enrollment, which the vast majority of districts in the state are, then it becomes an even bigger issue.
And I guess it's less of a question and more of just a comment. You know, hearing that the curriculum position is one of the things that's being evaluated. I understand that, you know, difficult decisions are going to have to be made. I have some real concerns with that, especially knowing, you know, that we're shifting to a calendar where we have dedicated time that's earmarked for professional development. And so I guess I'm just wondering, how far down do you anticipate that workload being shifted?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by how far down, but certainly there's going to be workload shifted. I don't, you know, exactly where all those pieces will fall, but we're still going to prioritize professional development. We still have to have Title I. We still have to, you know, make sure we're meeting the needs for special education, for EL, for all those pieces, gifted, like, all those are going to have to go somewhere, and we're still working out where that falls.
Okay. Thank you.
But I understand your concern, and I share your concern.
Do you have a timeline that you'll make that decision, or that you'll have an idea on what that looks like?
I think we're actively having those conversations now. I would say as we get through this next month or so, we'll have a much better idea of what that's going to look like. And I will continue to bring that back to you, just so you know where we're at and what that's going to look like.
I think the hardest thing is just waiting to see what happens with property taxes, because it could change a lot. And I don't know that one of the, this is a huge if, so I'm not expecting an answer at all, but it's just something that I think I should say out loud. If we default, what becomes collateral? What happens?
We just have to shift funds from somewhere else to cover it. Could be general fund, could be.
It wouldn't be like a special request, like it wouldn't become a debt service levy then, would it?
You'd still be paying that debt service levy. You just have to use a different funding source.
Do you know what I'm saying?
You asked a great question, because in my calculations, it would, like, the amount of sales tax revenue we'd be getting would be almost equal to our debt service payments. I mean, I don't think we're going to be as bad off as like some districts that we have heard about being in default because of the proposed, you know, shift in where that sales tax revenue money goes. I don't know. I don't think I can answer that question about, you know, what would happen if we, you know, our revenue bonds go out through 2030. So maybe we have to start holding back more now, even more than what we have to, you know. Right now, I just hold back what our principal and interest is for the upcoming fiscal year.
Because we did make sure that there were no early payoff penalties, right?
That I would have to go back and check if we can pay it off early. There is some rules about that, but I don't remember exactly.
I think part of the proposal that we picked was that there was not a penalty,
Okay.
but your brain
That's a
is
good memory.
way
Your
better.
memory might
No.
be better than, yeah,
I-
So let's, you know, yeah.
Okay.
Obviously, hope is not a good
Right.
budget, but, you know, yeah, we got to see how that shakes out, because, you know, that, I mean, that can't happen, I mean.
Right, I wouldn't even
Okay.
know the process. I know
Yeah.
it would just be
Right.
big one.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think ISFIS put out a document that kind of looks at all districts. And if they, you know, if
They
they did
did.
20%, 15%, 20%, up to 30%.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure with like the timelines and how all of that worked. Like, it seemed like nothing really aligned, and then I didn't really know our percentage and where we would fall. So it was helpful, but it was still a guessing game for me. So, yeah, all right, thank you. Right, do we have any other comments or questions? Okay. Move into the announcement section. March 9th, we have community conversations beginning at 5:30, followed by the regular board meeting at 6:15. March 9th through 12th is conference week in all of our buildings, and then March 13th, there will be no school, followed by spring break. Any other announcements? All right, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
sorry,
Need
who
a
seconded?
second. No one has yet.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.